You have a group of people who are enthusiastic new leaders. You have the unique position at LinkedIn with your particular responsibility of having, in a sense, your own startup.
Yeah.
Could you talk about the span of control that you have and what it's really taking to build that within an otherwise large global organization?
It's an incredibly exciting place to be, India as a country and Asia as a region. For LinkedIn as a whole, 1/6 of the world's professionals live in India, so it's a huge constituency, outside of China, that is a very strategic country for us. So in that context, obviously, everything that we do matters, and we're blessed to be the only country where we have all the other teams represented. So everything from engineering to operations to sales, and every function in between. So what I've been trying to do over the last couple of years is to take that asset and say, let's be the new Mountain View, right? Let's actually collaborate and come together and create some new ideas. Because one of the big shifts that we've been talking about, me and my leadership team, and now we're involving the entire population, is saying our problems are unique. So how do we actually band together, piece together this cross-functional collaboration to solve these problems at scale? In fact, when I was taking over this role, the prior president of NASSCOM said this statement to me, which really has resonated with me. He said, India is where adversity meets diversity, and that's where innovation happens. Because of the adversity, you're forced to think differently, and you're forced to think about what will work in this context. And so it's a really fertile ground, coupled with a very young population and employee base, as you said. So it's indeed a very, very exciting time.
You have then the volition to let this group be creative and be entrepreneurial. How do you give them the support that they need to feel like it's possible to push the envelope? What do you do as a leader?
Yeah, and this is particularly important in an Indian context, or most developing economies, right? Because we've grown up, and I'm sort of an example of this myself, in an education system that is a little bit rigid, right? They have rote learning. You're not really thinking very, very creatively. So with that sort of start, you're already a little bit behind. And the example I use, the analogy I use when I'm talking with our folks is, in the past, whether it's the agricultural age, the industrial age, process really mattered. And so from a management standpoint, because the process was kind of fixed, you could manage by fear, right? And bring the best out of your employees. In today's day and age, change is the only constant. There is no, formulaic answer, right? So you have to make sure that people then, are really thinking creatively to solve these problems. And it can't be like, the ivory tower, some person saying, this is the answer, let's go do this. So we're, as a result, pivoting a lot to management by innovation, or unlocking innovation through management by making people happy. So just focusing on a happier, productive workforce. You're probably familiar with Sean Ackor's work at HBS, and he talks about this happiness advantage. And we're really trying to bring that to life in India, and we've succeeded in a great part. So I'll give you an example of how we drive that kind of a culture. I've created this team called Engage India, which actually, they have their day jobs, but then their job is to make sure that, we build connective tissue across different functions and different locations. Whether it's things like celebrating a holiday, whether it's things like, organizing for community service to happen. So things like that, there's, with a team focused on that, then people start seeing that, hey, it's important. I spend a bunch of time in our all hands, and whenever I'm traveling different offices, talking about that. Things like facilities design. So we've got rid of offices and said, all the leaders will actually sit on the floor, be accessible to folks. Even in the way the offices are designed, it's not high-walled cubes. It's kind of an open floor plan. I've put collaboration right in the center. And I remember there's been a lot of resistance to this, right? Saying, oh my God, there's going to be too much noise. And I'm like, that's exactly what we want. We want collaboration in the center. If you need quiet time, go to the outside. There's all these rooms that are there for you. So it's like little changes like that's happening. And then with my leadership team, we're taking some intelligent risks, and as those are playing off and getting recognized in all hands back in Mountain View, people are now getting the conviction to say, hey, actually, this is cool. We can do that and be recognized. So slowly but surely, you're building that culture where people are feeling secure. The only request I make of people is make a million mistakes. Just make sure they're unique.
Don't continue to make the same mistakes. Learn from those mistakes, but feel free to do that. And you're partnering with your employees and your executives in a very unique way. Tell me about the relationship you have with your vendors, like Tata and others. Is there a supplier relationship there, or is that something deeper and more strategic?
It depends, I think, by vendor, but definitely there are a couple of vendors that we think of as strategic. So we've talked about, what is possible to innovate on. So there's one piece on the regular business, but how do you actually innovate? So, for example, one of the things that we wanted to pivot on in India is we use email a bunch in communications in the developed world, and for a lot of internet companies, that is the channel. Now, email effectiveness is materially lower in India in general. So you think, things like SMS and, OTP players, those guys become more important. So, we have a little pilot going on with Tata on, how do you actually unlock and send emails, send SMSs instead of emails. So those are sort of ways in which we strategically partner with organizations and vendors, or some of them at least.
The relationship that you have then with your vendor partners and with your employees, as a leader, when you think about the challenges that you face ahead, what would you say are some of the most noteworthy ones? What would be the 2 or 3 areas that you would point a young manager to? Particularly because you yourself have been recognized as one of the 40 under 40 most admired for the work that you've been doing as a young person. What would be your advice for others following in your footsteps?
So I think I heard 2 pieces, right? One was around challenges. What are the challenges one faces? And the other was around sort of what my advice may be. From a challenges standpoint, I think, was that in context of India or just generally? Yes. So in context of India, I think the challenges are a couple-fold. I think there is structural challenges like bandwidth and stuff that we have to solve to enable the entire ecosystem to really thrive. And there's work going on around that. But I think the people challenges where, like we at LinkedIn believe in it, I have passion in it, I've spent time so as it comes to life. But I would say a lot of Indian companies need to rethink their model, right? Of how do you have a remote leadership team? How do you unlock this culture of innovation for your employee base and so on? And in particular, kind of enabling young managers to take risks, right? So normally you would have a 10-point checklist to hire a person, but what if you don't have someone who fits all those 10? Would you take a bet on someone, because he or she has the right intrinsics? And then how do you develop them? So for example, we have very young managers in India, sometimes in LinkedIn India, it's sometimes the first time they're actually managing. So how do you actually give them wings to enable and empower their people? How do you get them to think differently? So again, like partnering with my L&D partners, we created something called Sparkin, where really for India, my focus is less on the content. There's a lot of content, great management courses and so on, but it's about how do we get them to learn? And imbibe that and really put it into practice. So for example, we have something called Manage In, which is an internal LinkedIn thing that helps managers sort of learn the art of management. But I'm taking that and saying, on Sparkin, I need to deliver that in different ways. So can I actually have a peer learning group where maybe there's role plays happening off that content? Otherwise it becomes a nice, interesting class, but people don't necessarily put it into practice. So I think that manager talent development pool is going to be one of the key constraints that India as a whole has to get around. And I think you go further back and our education system has to reform to really think creatively. So those are some of the challenges one faces in bringing this to life. But I think the advice that I have for folks is just you have to think unconstrained to make stuff happen, So if you think about all the constraints, you'll never get anywhere. And so, how do you actually look past those constraints, sort of, visualize where you want to go, and then, make things happen. So we talk a little bit about like these 3 parameters, right? You want to dream big, you want to get shit done, and you want to have fun. And it's that intersection of those 3 things that really, makes for a powerful culture for people who actually, break out innovation. So we talk a lot about those 3 aspects at the company.